right. All right, let's bring it in. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jackie Payne. I'm the ED of Galvanize USA, Galvanize Action, and the One for All Committee. I am so delighted to be here with all of you. We had nearly 300 people register for today, and that is a fantastic turnout. I'm so happy about that. So unlike our usual events where we get to see each other and dance together at the outset of a party, it means we can't see your faces, but it's so good to know you're here and to be in community with all of you. Because it's such a large crowd, we're not going to take Q&A from the live audience, but we did solicit some questions in advance, and we'll try to make sure we do capture the big questions on your mind. I was thinking a little bit about what happened this year, reflecting on what a wild year it has been with unprecedented political ups and downs. And really thinking about how, the personal is political, and how what happens in the world is reflected back into our own lived experience. So it made me think that earlier this year, my daughter and her friend Rose were the targets of anti-Semitism in school. They were bullied by a classmate who was taunting them about Hitler. A few months later, she had a hard moment when her mother has been telling her whole life that she is, it's her body, it's her choice. She has agency and power. And the Supreme Court contradicted me, stripping away her constitutional protections and her full personhood under the law. But then fast forward to this fall, and we arrived at our soccer game, and the other team didn't have enough players to play the game. And most of the kids on our team would have rather forfeit the game and gone on home than reset their thinking around who is us and who is them. And it reminded me of the incredible power of tribalism and social identity, and how our minds fear a social death as much as our minds fear a physical one. And so as their coach, I said to them, look, we need a couple of you to make this choice for the greater good. And, why are we here? What's your, real value? What about the joy of the game? And tried to get them to think about what was truly important to them and who they are. And I asked who was brave enough to do something scary, like switching sides and going to play with the other team so that the game could go on. And most of the girls backed up from me and held on to each other, and they clung to their team. But my daughter and Rose, who had been so dehumanized and degraded earlier in the year, were just brave enough to reimagine what was possible and have clarity about what was most important to them. That was playing the game. And so they donned a different color penny, and for the good of everybody, they went out there so the game could continue. And I felt like that's really part of what we saw happen in these midterms. Against all odds, people showed up and they thought about what really mattered to them, and they voted with their highest values for the greater good. And some of them even, put on a different penny, which gave all of us this democracy, our country, the chance to play on and to get better. So I'm really delighted to be here with y'all and in conversation with Kim Scott, to have this opportunity to pause and reflect on what happened this year and what it means for the work ahead. If you don't already know Kim, I'm really excited to introduce you to her. She has had an illustrious career as a leader and manager of some of the most powerful tech companies in the United States. She led several teams at Google, including my children are most excited about YouTube. She was a member of faculty at Apple U. She has been a CEO coach for major tech companies, including Dropbox and Twitter, which, we could talk about that, the old Twitter. And she's gone on to write two fantastic books on leadership and management called Just Work and Radical Candor. And when I read Radical Candor, I thought, oh, this is my person. Like, she really believes in the power of that you can have extraordinary impact if you, without losing your humanity. And in fact, the two are tied together. You can have compassion and incredible results. So I'm super excited to have Kim as a supporter of ours, as a friend, and for agreeing to join us here today to interview me and help us think about what happened this past year and what does it mean for the future. So thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you, Jackie. And I have to say, I have learned so much from you actually about radical candor, because it's one thing to apply radical candor at work. Radical candor is caring personally and challenging directly at the same time. And it's one thing to do that about saying too much or too many typos in your presentation. But how do we have these kinds of radically candid conversations around issues that are much more emotionally charged? How do I go? To me, the flyover states are not the flyover states. It's my hometown. So how can we have these conversations in a way that we are forceful and powerful, and and we still can show that we care. We don't lose our humanity. And this is incredibly difficult. Like one time I was at a presentation that I had to give about radical candor, and I didn't really do my homework for this before I gave this presentation. And I realized that this organization cared about things that I hated. This was this policy group, and they were on the opposite sides of all the issues that I care most deeply about. And I thought, gosh, do I want to talk to these people? And I decided, well, I'm not really walking the radical candor talk if I don't. And so I got up and I was giving this presentation, and they were asking me the usual sets of questions. And I had this sudden realization, like, these people are not my enemies. you know, these are my fellow Americans. And sorry, I'm getting emotional because I think a lot of us are so emotional around these topics now. And when I finished the presentation, and this woman came up to me and she said, do you believe X? Do you believe Y? And I said, yes, of course I do. And I told her what I truly believe. And but I was like having this moment where reminding myself this is not my enemy. And she looked at me and she said, "You don't seem like an evil person." And I thought, well, of course I'm not an evil person. And it was a moment where we really could talk and connect. And I think you have created those kinds of moments for so many women around the world. So thank you, around the country anyway, and soon around the world. So I know that so many of you on this call are longtime supporters of Galvanize, and Jackie. But for those of you who are meeting Jackie for the first time, I want to share a little bit of background. First of all, she was a legal aid lawyer, and then she was director of government relations for Planned Parenthood. And most recently, she designed and ran a movement building project called the Novo Foundation. Jackie has over 2 decades, 20 years of experience leading organizations and working to advance gender, racial, and economic justice before she founded Galvanize in 2018. I'm so drawn to the fact that her work here is rooted in research, research, research. Her commitment is to innovation, evaluation, and testing, all the things that we care so deeply about here in Silicon Valley. And she tests everything rigorously and sets the stage for an incredibly strategic approach that gets results and is efficient. Jackie, for the new folks joining us today, can you start off with your elevator pitch? Tell us a little bit about what you do at Galvanize USA and Galvanize Action, and why we need these organizations so much to have these conversations that are so hard to have.
Sure. Thanks, Kim. I think just for a tiny bit of context, I read this work in what's happening globally and what's happening in the US. And so, like many of you, I'm extremely concerned about the rise in authoritarianism globally and the deterioration of democracy. It's happening around the world, and it certainly is happening here at home. Just this very week, our former president and the leading candidate for the Republican Party for the 2024 once again spread disinformation and called for the termination of the US Constitution. So we're in a very real moment of threat to our democracy, and our country's at a tipping point. In order to survive, we have to evolve into a durable multiracial democracy in which everybody can thrive. And the way that we're going to be able to do that evolution requires more white folks to join with more people of color to make up that durable, powerful majority. The math of that is explicitly clear, it's undeniable. And I think so is the morality. So this slide is just showing you that white women are the largest voting bloc in the nation. Where we work in our states, white women make up 45, 46% of the electorate. White people make up in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, we're looking at 85% or more of the electorate. So this is not something we can leave to folks of color to try to solve for us, right? We need to do this together and bring more white people into the fold around what does it look like to evolve into this durable multiracial coalition for progress. So that's a both and approach. And I just want to really emphasize, to me, it's not just about the math. It's not just about what has to be true in order to win in this election, right? We're winning these or losing these elections by 26,000 votes, by 100,000 votes. They're tiny, tiny margins. Whether we win or lose at that, we cannot stay in this incredibly polarized electorate where one half of the people thinks the other half is the enemy, to Kim's point, and where we're increasingly willing to use violence to try to help our side win. So we need to not only win, but we need to bring more folks along into believing in this vision of a future, so we can build the power to create, a really durable democracy and progress for everybody. So to that end, we run 3 different organizations. The first is Galvanize USA. That's a nonpartisan civic empowerment program. That's where we're working with women to build community, to build their trust in themselves and in government, to combat disinfo, and to help folks think about what they think about the issues. In Galvanize Action, we are more tailored. We find, connect, and persuade those movable white women who are moderate, who are open, to help them align their values and their vote together. So that's what Galvanize Action does. And then my PAC is a separate, unaffiliated PAC, and that is an organization that just really comes in at the end for the elections and says, this is the candidate you're going to want to vote for this time because they really reflect your values and your vision for this country.
Thank you so much, Jackie. So I want to get back to the midterms because I feel bewildered. I'm a white woman. I know a lot of white women, and I don't know very many at all who shifted. I mean, in fact, pretty much everyone I know, even back home in Memphis, but did not shift right. What happened? Who are these white women, and how can we talk to them in a radically candid way? Without sort of attacking or viewing them as the enemy, how can we bring them along? And how did you actually bring? Because I think you got to some of them, but who are the others, and how can we get to them next time?
Yeah. Well, so for some context, historically in a midterm year, with economic insecurity the way that it is now, with low presidential favorables, we would expect to see voters try to course correct. So that's kind of what midterms are. They usually say, we voted for you, we don't love what you're doing, I'm going to try to course correct. And usually that turns into punishing the party in power. That's certainly what folks expected in the spring. And nationally, that is, in fact, what happened. Nearly every single demographic group shifted to the right by several percentage points. So we did see that shift. But the red wave didn't happen. So why not? In key battleground states, independents, moderate voters, they rejected the extremism of the minority party, right? They pushed back against the stripping of fundamental freedoms, against the attacks on LGBTQ folks. They pushed back against the election denying, and they said that is too extreme for us, and we reject that. And so in those battleground states, we were able to create that movement. Nationally, white women favored Republicans by 8 percentage points. This was not the case where we worked. We significantly improved the margins among white women in every place where we worked. That's what happened for us in 2020. And again, we saw it in 2022. Here you can see, so here's the national chart where white women went to Republicans by 8 percentage points. But then look at what happened in Pennsylvania. That was the only Senate race where the Democrats actually picked up a seat from the Republicans. And there we saw white women favored the Democratic candidate by 3 percentage points. So that's an 11 percentage point net movement compared to the national. In Wisconsin, we saw white women overperform the national average by 7 percentage points. And so looking at the exit polls right now, it looks like white women voted for the incumbent Republican by about 1 percentage point there. And Johnson won by fewer than 27,000 votes. And so that was a really painful loss. And if we have time at the end, maybe we can come back to that. But the upside is that look at that movement that we were able to have and the progress there. We also worked in the Michigan ballot initiative. There we saw white women overwhelmingly support the abortion ballot initiative. And they went on to support the pro-choice governor and take back both houses there. And then we also worked in one House race. In Ohio, there was one race where the Democratic candidate had a 16 percentage point chance of picking up that seat, of flipping that seat from the Republican. And we went to work there. We identified 100,000 moderate white women who our data shows we could persuade if we connected with them. We invested in that race and we helped Democrats to pick up that seat. So that was a lot of progress. So wherever we worked, we saw progress. And you asked, like, how did we do it? The biggest takeaway for us was that we have undisputable evidence now that our persuasion program works. So we conducted a randomized control trial of 2,000 white women voters in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Ohio. And what we wanted to do, we were running our big program, our persuasion program, to talk to all these voters across from May through Election Day. And embedded in that program, we said, we don't want to just say the activity we did. We want to show the actual impact we know we had. So we embedded a randomized control trial. 1,000 women got the control, which means they didn't see our ads. 1,000 women saw the treatment. They saw our full ads. And what we saw was the women who saw our ads, we increased their support for the Democratic Senate candidate by 8.33 percentage points. For context, that's just extraordinary results. We went and we were so delighted by it. We had an outside firm, independent.
It's almost unbelievable. I mean, say it again.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's funny that you say that because we had an outside firm of PhDs who we contracted with and said, do a regression analysis, go through all of our data. We want it externally validated or debunked. We want to know the truth. And they went through and they actually called us halfway through and said, we're getting really, really strong results. We're going to run it again because it's shocking. And they said, stunning how good these results are. They ran it again and they validated that we were able to increase voters' support for the Senate candidate over that 6-month period through election day to 8.3 percentage points.
And most folks get like 1 percentage point, right? So you're
Yeah,
8 times
yeah,
better. Is that right?
exactly. So the Analyst Institute, which is the firm that studies this for movements, they did an analysis after the last midterms, and they looked at all the different persuasion efforts, and they found the average persuasion to be 1.11 percentage points. So strikingly different. I mean, I think that's why that firm called us and said, we need to run it again, because it was such a powerful result.
So how do you do it? I mean, is it because women are more reasonable and you're approaching like what's the how do you achieve? I mean, 8 times better is a lot better.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? What's your secret sauce?
Yeah, I think that I know our secret sauce is rooted in a few things. One is all of our work is rooted in neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and then powered by data science. So the neuroscience and behavioral psychology are out there. They tell us, how do minds change and how does behavior change? We set out when we started this program 4 years ago to really understand what is going on with folks. How can you connect with someone? How can you help them open their mind to something? What creates those opportunities? And then how do we get them to change their behavior so they don't just think it, but they act on it? Then we use data science to apply and scale those results. So I think that's the thing that sets us apart most. The second thing is, we know our audience extremely well. We know not only, lots of folks poll, or do surveys, but we look at what are their attitudes, what are their opinions, but then we are able to match that to what are their core values. And we were able to segment people and say, oh, this is interesting. The people who are showing up as anti-immigrant also show up with this core value. And we're able to think about how do we meet them at that value. We explore what motivates them. And importantly, what are their barriers to change? So you can know a lot about someone, what they think, why they think it, what gets them up in the morning. But if you don't address what's holding them back, that's a huge problem, right? So we look at all of that together. And for example, we're able to take a look and understand, why might some folks be who view themselves as compassionate and show up and compassionate and part of the, in their life, why are they being subconsciously receptive to dog whistle politics?
Yeah.
What's going on that they would be dragged to authoritarianism using this us versus them, and they don't see themselves that way? So understanding that is a lot of our secret sauce. It allows us to be a force that can counter it. And then we micro target our messages specifically to the folks based on that. So this person needs to hear this person needs to hear that. And that really is what is really helpful. I think two other things I'd add is we do the engagement over time. So this study that we just tested, it was a 6 months of conversation. We were talking to folks before the Dobbs decision leaked, all the way through the election, right? We help them make sense of what is happening, what they think about it. So what do I think about this issue? Where do I stand? What do I expect from my government? And then who should I vote for? So it's a relationship.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. It seems like it's not only data and analysis, but it's also building that relationship over time and using some some humanity.
Yeah.
Some understanding where people are coming from, and that requires some human cognition, right?
Yes.
We can't do that yet. So go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was just going to say, you mentioned also that we're so rigorous about the testing, and I think that's the other thing that really does set us apart, is that in addition to truly, using our heart and understanding folks and really understanding how they move, we also are over the top rigorous about our research and testing. So once we figure out what do we think is going to work, map that to their values, we develop the messages, then we test those scripts. Once we test the scripts, we say, which of those are proven in the lab to cause statistically significant movement? This past year, we had over 250 messages across different issues that were proven to move women towards progress. Then we took those messages and said, which ones of those do we want to make into ads? We created ads. Then we tested those ads before we ran them, which is a huge and important and often skipped point, because people will think, well, the message works, so the ad will work. Not always.
Not always.
Sometimes a misstep in the actor or the tone or something can play wrong, and it's not effective. So we test the ads, and only the ones that are most effective do we then run. And that running those ads is what helps us to make sure we have really high return on investment, because we're only spending money on deployment into the field of things that we have super high confidence are going to work.
So I'm really excited to see one or two of those ads. I love your ads. They're very moving. But before we jump in and do that, you said something that sort of sparked a question for me. You said you test them in the lab. Like, what does that mean? What does testing messaging in a lab look like? How do you do that?
Yeah, so we work with some amazing partners. One of the ones who we truly love and who help us level up our game they're called Grow Progress. They help us to bring in grow progress, like gardening.
Oh, okay.
They help us to bring together a group of folks. So we might have 1,000 women who represent our audience, and then we will show them our ad, and then we'll also show another group, randomized group, a placebo. And then we can test to see, did the group that saw our ad, did it statistically move their support for our success question? So we might say, does it make them more supportive of abortion, or does it make them more likely to believe that this candidate is going to have their back, right? So we show those ads, we test them against the placebo, and then if we see that success there, that's enough to get us to decide we'll run it, and then we track it in the field in the wild. So it's one thing to see it when you're just sitting at your computer. It's another thing to see it when it comes across your iPhone when you're streaming something. At that point, we test to see, do you actually click on it? Do you watch the whole thing? And then we're able to see what happens to your movement. We survey our panel and say, all right, these folks saw that ad on abortion. Did they move or not? And that kind of testing allows us to say, oh, that ad's working in the wild. Let's, kick it up, or draw it back if not.
Yeah. So your ads, one of the reasons why I love what you do so much is that your ads are really different. They appeal to the reasonable person. So can we watch a couple of them? And also, after we watch them, can you tell us where they're running? Are they running on TV? Where would we see these ads?
Sure. So why don't we look, since abortion was such a big thing in this last cycle, why don't we look at abortion as an example? We were studying the issue of reproductive freedom since Texas banned abortion. So, a year before the Dobbs ban leaked almost. And we were trying to understand what was going on with our audience around this issue. And what we saw was our voters, many of them, we thought of them as like pro-choice enough. They want to support abortion rights, but they also feel conflicted, and many of them aren't so sure that they would have an abortion, or they have some reservations. So we needed to help them make sense of their own values. Where did they stand on the issue, and create a permission structure for them to say, well, this is what I believe, and I'm going to hold public officials accountable to it, even if people around them weren't saying that. So that was really the approach we took with every issue. But on abortion, it was understanding what's up with this segment of women. Many of them were religious. Virtually all of them were very high in in-group care, which means their priority motivator is going to be their family, their children, their extended family, and they're also super high in compassion. So let me show you two different ads about how we were able to talk to folks about abortion.
Great.
My faith teaches me to have compassion for the complex decisions that each person must make in their life. I believe that the decision to become a parent is deeply personal, and that a woman has the right to make reproductive decisions with her doctor, her family, and her faith. It's not my place or the government's to tell her what to do. And that's why I support upholding Roe v. Wade.
Everyone's worried about the economy. We are too. But the thing is, we're not loaded or anything, but I know we're gonna be okay. We need to vote not just on the economy, but on other issues that are really important to us right now, like reproductive freedom and the environment. We need somebody who understands us, who will fight for us. That's why I trust John Fetterman to stand up for the issues that hardworking families like mine care about.
So you can see how those two ads kind of layer together. They're both women in the context of their families, both use tapping into that in-group care value and the compassion value. The first one is really looking at, for religious women, what we found was they didn't want to be judgmental of others. They wanted to figure out how to navigate their own position and still be able to support others. And so that you saw in that ad moved women, I think 18 percentage points to support reproductive freedom. And then the second ad we used, and that's in the context of the obviously the Pennsylvania Senate race. And there we had multiple different ads, but that one was focused on lean R suburban women who, yes, they're worried about the economy, but they're a little bit less worried about it for themselves. They actually do think that they're going to do okay. And we heard that repeatedly. So worried about the economy in general, but also what's the permission we can give them to say, in this moment, you really need to think about your kid's future and about what the role that abortion plays in that. And what we saw in Pennsylvania was suburban women went 53-46 for Fetterman. And that's an increase about how they did for Biden in 2020 by about, I think, 6 points, I think.
Wow.
So really a significant movement here, and improvement over how suburban women did nationwide as well.
That's unbelievable. So if you had the budget to run these ads everywhere in the country, what do you think part of it is these races and your message, the sort of moderate, there were more moderates, but what if you went, what do you think? I'm throwing you a curveball here, but what would happen if you went to places where there maybe are fewer moderates? Like what can you move some of the extreme, some of the more, what we would consider, what I would consider, but probably they wouldn't consider themselves extreme. What would happen?
Part of the beauty of our work is that we're able to segment our voters based on ideology as a part of it. And we can say, well, who is movable in this state, in this race, in this moment, and on what ground? So what we have a whole one of the analyses that this firm did for us when they looked at our work over the 6 months was they looked at for right of center, more conservative voters, were we successful at moving them on reproductive freedom? And the results on that were among the most stunning results we had. We moved them 28.7, I think. I'll double check, but I think it's over 28 percentage points. Oh, thanks, Allie. Allie's popping up a slide for us. So this is an example of how do we move more conservative voters on the issue of reproductive freedom over time. And you can see that incredible movement in terms of making that issue more salient to them, something that they care about. Now, to be fair, like more progressive folks, it was already pretty high for them. So we didn't have to move their salience as much. For more conservative folks, we had to talk to them about the issue in a way that worked for them. So what we saw there was using the patriotism frame was really effective. So for them, there's a great ad we did in Wisconsin where this nurse says, this is supposed to be America, right? And she's like frustrated by this invasion of her freedom. What we imagine is that right that's being invaded upon and the control over one's own body. And that was a much more effective approach for the conservative folks. So, and we had friends who are running ads in other states pick up our work and use it. So we only ran our ads this cycle in 6 states, but our messages and our ads went to 17 states, including states that were not as much battlegrounds, that were deeper red. And we just worked with those partners to say, this will work better for you where you are with who you're targeting.
Yeah, that's incredible. So let's talk about the issues, because there was so much buzz that it's all going to be about the economy. But how much did reproductive freedom and abortion galvanize voters? I mean, to me, that, like, I can't understand why it didn't galvanize everybody. But what does the data say?
Yeah. So honestly, the data says what we thought it would after doing this work with this audience for so long, that we anticipated that abortion would have an outsized impact in the midterms, and I 100% believe that it did. I think that we were headed towards a tsunami, a red tsunami, and the Dobbs decision took the wind out of those sails.
Yeah.
Because it galvanized the base.
Yeah.
So it was a vote driver mostly for Democrats, for young women, for college educated women. That's really what it was, who it galvanized, to some degree independents, and a little bit Republicans, and we can talk about that. What we saw though was that, so we're seeing a segment of the folks say that Roe was the most important factor for them, and we did another poll right on election day and after election day, asking white women what motivated your vote, what drove you to vote. And what we saw there was voters who said that it was Roe. If that was the single most important factor for them, they went 2-1 for the Democratic candidates, right? So that was really pulling folks out for the base. What we also saw was a larger percentage of white women, and particularly of our swing or moderate white women, they were also really looking at the economy. They were talking about economy, inflation as their top concern. We saw that from May through the end, economy and inflation was always listed as their number one. But then and the reality is it's not either or. People were holding both. And we had some of our qualitative independent women saying, the truth is there isn't just one issue. Maybe they may have written economy or written abortion, but then when they answered the question, they said, I was holding both of those. I'm worried about paying rent, and I'm also worried about reproductive freedom. So I'm trying to figure out who's got my back. The challenge for Democrats is that people tend to think that Republicans are better at the economy, and that's who has their back on the economy. And so that has been a challenge for Democrats across the board. One of the things that we worked on when we talked with voters about the economy was shoring up this notion of who actually, look at who's running, who has done something for you, who's looking out for your family. Think about in-group care, who's got your back. And one of the things that we saw was we were able to decrease the number of people who were blaming Biden and the Democrats for the problems we're having with economy and inflation. And so we decreased that significantly. And then we increased the number of people who were blaming corporations and greed. And the importance of that is, remember how we started when we talked about the midterms, that people normally are looking to punish the people in power for not doing a good job. In this moment, people said, well, I'm not that thrilled with how the economy is going. I'm pretty worried about it, but I'm not totally going to blame Biden or the Democrats for that. And in fact, I think the real culprit might be these greedy corporations. So that deflates my desire to punish the Democrats a little bit. And at the same time, I'm looking at this overreaching by extremists on reproductive freedom and other issues. And there I'm like, I don't like that. So the reality is people are holding all of this and we're talking to them about all of it, right? We're not just saying it's abortion or it's economy or it's healthcare. We're saying we're tracking and asking them, what are you worried about? What are you thinking about? And then we're talking to them about all those issues in the months leading up to the election.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear that you're able to move people. I mean, there's nothing good for an economy about right-wing extremism. Like, authoritarianism is terrible for the economy. Yeah. And so I'm glad you're able to move folks on that dimension. But what do we need to know about 2024? How is all of this going to play out in the 2024 election?
Yeah, so I'll start by looking a little bit deeper into 22. I mean, one of the things, economy and abortion were top of mind for most of the voters, right? But another thing we heard a lot about was, well, what about crime? And we watched the far right use really atrocious attacks on LGBTQ folks and deny the elections. And so how did that play into it? So for most voters, it was economy and abortion. For a small segment, it was on these other culture wars as their motivating issue. I think right after the midterms, folks felt like, well, here's some good news. Like, look at Michigan as an example. In Michigan, they really used anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ, anti-public education attacks as a way to say to folks, the left is too extreme, don't go with them. And that was roundly rejected, right? So we won that reproductive freedom ballot initiative. The Democrats won the state houses, they won the governorship. And so I think a lot of folks on the left were like, whoa, that's good news. You know, it didn't work. And what I would say is there's some truth to that, that for sure we saw in our results that independents, persuadables, they were not being dragged to the right by those particular culture war issues. And I don't think it's the end of the culture wars, right? We're watching globally how there's a playbook for fascism. We're seeing it happen in all these other countries, and people use us versus them. They use othering. In other countries, it's highly anti-immigrant, anti-migrant, anti-Semitic, and anti what they call gender invasion, so anti-LGBTQ and reproductive rights. So those are the prongs of a fascist playbook, and we're seeing that used here in the U.S. We saw, it's not just Trump, right? We saw DeSantis run a "Don't Say Gay" bill. We saw the House introduce an anti-gay bill, at the same time that we're trying to protect marriage equality. So we're seeing that playbook used. And so this question is, well, what have the Republicans, what have MAGA Republicans learned? What will they decide to do? Will they learn the lesson of Michigan? Don't use that, or will they continue it? And my sense is that they will continue it. And here's why. I had a friend who's very high up in DC politics, and she was in a closed door meeting in DC in the days after the midterms. And someone asked a high level Republican strategist, like, well, are y'all just crying in your beers? Like, why aren't you counting the days till your show is over? And he put up a slide that was titled "The Sleeping Giant." And he just showed the room that for what the huge number of non-college voters exist that haven't been turned out yet. So lots of times when we think about turnout, we're talking about, oh, young folks and people of color, and let's turn out our base, right? Well, the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, are also thinking about turnout, and they've got there's I think 71 million non-college folks who are eligible to vote, who are not yet voting, and who these kinds of culture wars are being used as bait to try to pull them to the right and to feel like this country doesn't care about you anymore, come with us. So, and he said that's their opportunity. And for every person of color who has not yet turned out to vote, there's it's a 1.7 white folks who have not yet turned out to vote. And so the opportunity there, Republicans see as is really hitting those culture. Yes, what that means is, we got to think about what does it look like to get us to January 2025, where we have elected candidates who are willing to stabilize our democracy and support support progress. And how do we make sure that our American electorate accepts those results and that we don't see a repeat of January 6th? So we want to see that peaceful transfer of power. So for us, that means we got to talk to folks about kitchen table issues. What matters to them? What do they care about? What are they worried about for their kids, the economy, care, education? What's happening in their immediate life that is so tangible? We have to build their support up for democracy and their own agency and belief in voting and systems. And then lastly, because really we are the ones doing it, we need to inoculate against these culture wars. We need to continue the work we've been doing to say to these voters, you don't want to go that way. Those are not your people. When they're attacking LGBTQ folks, when they're banning abortion, when they're being anti-Semitic, when they're being anti-immigrant, when they're trying to destroy public education, that's not who you are. That's not your vision for this country and your people. And we can do it by talking to them using their values, care and nostalgia and patriotism, and say, come, let's build something else together. Let's evolve this democracy. And so really that's our work for the next 3 years.
Yeah, yeah. And sort of appealing to those white voters who do not want to be racist, right? Like there are those voters out there. And yet it's like, it's appalling as a white person to see how effective that sort of, those kind of dog whistle. And so sort of educating people on what, what is this saying about you? You are not that person, right? I guess. I mean, I would like to imagine that's going to be effective.
Yeah, I would say it's not educating, because if education sounds to me like facts, and fact battles never work. It is offering them a different emotional appeal that connects to their sense of self and their values and says, let's not go that way. And that is part of the beauty of our approach, because people are opting in, and all persuasion is self-persuasion, right? So we need them to self-persuade that I'm going to go this way with you all.
Yeah, that's not me. That's not who I want to be. This is who I want to be.
Yeah.
So you raised over $15 million this year, and you only started Galvanize 4 years ago. So that's a lot of money. My big question is, what were you able to achieve with it? And of course, I'm going to get to how can we like put some extra zeros on that so that you can really blow things out.
Yeah, I'm super proud of what our team did this year. I mean, considering that we've only been around for a couple of years, I'm very, very proud of our team. I think, as like you say in your book, right? Like people really respond to impact and humanity. They like that we're taking a clear-eyed view of the problem. We're not running away from it. But we're finding positive, hopeful solutions. With compassion, and then being able to provide the receipts for what we're doing is actually working, right? That people are delighted to see this report that we just got out that shows, with all that data and rigor and independently validated, that it is, a stunning set of results. That's important. That our return on investment is so high. We did an analysis of our estimated cost per Dem vote. And that was $10.83. I mean,
can we just pause on that number, because I know some very data-driven tech people whose cost was more like 100. So you're doing 10 times better than others. So we give you $1 and you're going to get 8 to 10 times as much for that.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the opportunity for us. It's like, now that we have so much proof of our success, we spent just under $7 million on our ad buy this cycle, and that represents less than 0.04% of the entire ad buy, right? We had such a tiny part, and look at the outsized results. So when you ask, like, what would be possible if we were able to scale up, I think everything is possible. And I'm so excited about what our future holds. In this cycle, as I said, we ran our stuff in 6 states, but then part of our approach is always going to be scale by sharing. We're not going to be everywhere. How can we teach our colleagues, like, this is what we're learning, this might work for you? How do we share our work so that they can take what already exists and use it? That's a part of our approach. And then what does it look like for us to expand in the next couple of years so that we're scaling up and really having the impact that's critically necessary at this moment in history?
So inspiring. Can we talk a little bit? Can we go back to Wisconsin? I would love to talk a little bit about Wisconsin and learn from you what you were able to achieve there, because it seems really like there's more to that story.
Yeah, thank you. So as a reminder, where we ended up in Wisconsin was Johnson won by 1 percentage point with white women, right? He won by fewer than 27,000 votes. Allie, if you can find that Wisconsin slide, and maybe we'll pop it up here. This is a chart that shows what was going on with white women in Wisconsin over the time that we were talking with them. And what you see here is we were talking with them from May. We had support. Barnes was ahead by 4 percentage points going into September. Then for all of us who run C3 ads talking about issues, we need to stop those ads in the weeks leading up to an election, because those ads can't be used to try to for electioneering purposes. So anything that we were doing that was using C3 nonpartisan dollars to try to talk with voters about how they felt about the issues, that needed to stop by about the first week in September. So that stops sort of movement wide. And what we saw was Barnes was low in what the money he had at that time. And the Republicans went hard with a huge investment and overinvested compared to Democrats in those couple of weeks in early September. And they talked a lot about crime. Whereas crime didn't generally work with swing voters, what we saw here was that it absolutely had that you could see from the data there that that moment, those couple of weeks were really successful at attacking Barnes, in part, I think, because, and we'll continue to do our research on this, because of the race baiting with a Black candidate, in part because of some of his vulnerabilities, and certainly because of the moment where they capitalized on the amount of money they had early in the race. We then received significant funding from donors towards the middle and end of September, and started to be able to go back up with our with my PAC, started being able to do Barnes specific ads, and Barnes started to get money, and so did other folks in Wisconsin, other partners. And you can see that we were able to bring back voter support for Barnes up to almost those same levels. And so when I look at that, I think, oh my goodness, what if we hadn't had that dip? What if we had been funded earlier, right? You know, the PAC money this year, as in most years, doesn't come in until right before the election. But we're showing with our data that if we're talking to folks early in an ongoing way, and we didn't have this gap, we wouldn't have lost those points. And there's a decent chance, and the partners in Wisconsin feel like if we had been in there 2 weeks earlier, or if we all had another week at it, we could have helped Barnes overcome the incumbent benefit that Johnson had, right? He had a real advantage as an incumbent. And so Barnes did exceptionally well against that incumbent advantage, but we think we could have helped him win back those 26,000 votes and actually win. And that would have been picking up another seat, which would have meant, after Georgia's win, that Democrats would not have been as dependent on Sinema and Manchin to pass things. So that would have been a huge victory on top of what I think the success that we did actually already have there. So we'll stay always in the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt are our people. We'll always be in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. We'll be in Ohio. And then, so you'll see us there again in, we're already planning what's happening in Q1 of next year to keep talking with folks. And then we're going to start expanding out to Texas and elsewhere for 24.
So what I'm hearing you say is, for 24, you need the money now so that you can start these conversations. So I would love for folks. We just dropped Kelly just dropped a donation link in. I'm going to be shameless in saying every dollar you give is going to be worth 8 to 10 times more than dollars you give in other ways. And it's important to give early so that, because these conversations and sort of helping white voters persuade themselves that they don't want to give in to this sort of racist authoritarian rhetoric, that's not good for who they want to be. It's not good for their families, and it's not good for the economy. It's just bad. But they've got to persuade themselves, and that takes time. You know how to help them do that, but it takes time. So I want to encourage folks to give early and to get involved early, because these conversations are so important. Yeah. And so hard to have. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what was a moment, and all of this is gut wrenching, but what's a moment that brought you joy in the last year? Like, what's a moment from your work that filled you with joy and optimism, because we need, I think, more joy and optimism.
Yeah, honestly, this work brings me joy. It seeing people's humanity, connecting with them, seeing that, and really listening and saying, what do you want? What's going on for you? What's holding you back from being part of this? How can I connect with you? That brings me so much joy. It is the most constructive work. I feel so on purpose. As someone who spent her whole life doing gender, racial, and economic justice work, I see the impact I'm having in folks' lives and in the bottom line for voting. So that alone is powerful. And then I was just at the Democracy Alliance last week, and I did a presentation on these stunning persuasion results. And afterwards, a young man came up to me and he said, we want to be you when we grow up. Like he's trying to do for the in language Asian American voters what we're doing with white women. And I was like, first of all, that's amazing. I was so humbled because I was like, we're only 4, but thank you. So now I'm like, okay, what will it look like for us to share what we learned about neuroscience, which is universal? I showed him our playbook. I introduced him to donors. I'm like, let's do that for you. And then I was on a panel with Melissa Morales from Somos, and we have each other's back. She's organizing Latina voters who are being dragged. They were dragged to the right even more than white women this cycle, right? So how are we working together as a movement truly committed to a durable multiracial democracy in which all of us thrive? Like this is working and we can win together. And I think I've never felt more hopeful in this bananas dark time where everything is, the news cycle is hard and it's just one hit after the other. Trump's meeting with Fuentes and Kanye and anti-Semitic and racist, but like we've got an option, we've got solutions that work. So
Yes,
I think that feels good.
yeah, no, that is what gets me up in the morning. It is the opportunity to create solidarity, because we can't combat this unless we do it in solidarity with everyone who is harmed by these sort of authoritarian, by this move to authoritarianism. So I know we've got about 2 minutes. I want to encourage folks, if you have questions about where to direct your gift or any other questions, please feel free to reach out to kelly.starr@galvanizeaction.org. You can see that in the chat. And Jackie, I want to thank you for the work you are doing. I am so grateful. It's so hard. It is so hard I talk about radical candor, but you saw me get emotional. It's really hard to have these conversations when we go back, at least when I go back home, and these people who I love, who seem to believe things that are antithetical to what they themselves raised me to believe are our values. So thank you for the work you're doing. It gives me optimism for the future.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here with us today, Kim, and for doing this with us. I want to thank the team. We have the most amazing team that works so hard to make this happen. So I deeply appreciate the team, and also just all the supporters on the call today. And there are hundreds of you that you made this happen. I hope you feel proud of what you did and what's possible now because of what you invested in. And I just really want to thank you. And a call back to my little girl and her soccer team, like, let's go put on our pennies and remember what's important and play, right? Like, let's go do it. So I thank you very much, and send this video out to your friends, help folks get to know us. We need more of us in this work together. Thank you.